Ahoy there, and welcome aboard for a deep dive into a world that's, well, frankly, a bit of a mystery to me. Ships. I know they float and carry stuff, but beyond that, I'm all at sea. Luckily, we've got a genuine maritime expert with us today to help us navigate this vast subject.
Glad to be here. Ships are definitely more than just things that float.
That's what I'm hoping to learn. And our compass for this exploration is, appropriately enough, a Wikipedia article all about ships. Tons of information just waiting to be uncovered.
Wikipedia is a great place to start for something like this.
All right, so first things first, when I think of ships, my mind jumps to those massive cargo ships hauling containers across the ocean. But I know there's a whole universe of ships out there. Can you give us a sense of the variety we're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. You've got everything from tiny fishing boats to those gigantic cargo ships you mentioned.
Well,
And then there are passenger ships, which have gone from, essential transportation to these luxury cruise ships.
yeah, it's amazing how those have evolved. It's like they're floating cities now.
Right. And then you have your naval ships, of course, for military purposes, plus all sorts of specialized vessels, research ships, even weather ships out there braving the elements. It's quite diverse.
It really is. And it seems like ships have been around forever. Didn't the ancient Egyptians build some pretty impressive ships? Weren't those used for trade and even warfare along the Nile?
They were master shipbuilders. In fact, the Khufu ship, discovered near the Great Pyramid of Giza, is a testament to their skills. That vessel dates back over 4,500 years.
4,500 years. That just blows my mind that something built that long ago could still exist today. What about other ancient cultures? The Vikings, for example, were known for their ships, right?
The Vikings, definitely. Their longships were designed for speed and maneuverability, perfect for raiding, exploring, you name it. They were incredibly seaworthy, navigating both rivers and open seas, which is how they reached so many places, from North America to the Caspian Sea.
Wow. It's fascinating how shipbuilding innovations spread and evolved across different cultures over time. Okay, so we've got ancient civilizations mastering shipbuilding, but obviously there have been some major advancements over the centuries. What about the whole sail versus steam thing? And while we're at it, can we finally settle that age-old debate? What's the actual difference between a boat and a ship?
Ah, yes, the classic conundrum. Well, the shift from sails to steam was definitely a huge leap in maritime technology. But to tackle that boat versus ship question first, it's not as simple as size, although that's a common misconception.
So it's not just about a ship being bigger than a boat.
Exactly. A ship is typically built for extended sea voyages, carrying significant cargo or passengers. It's about seaworthiness, purpose, and even legal definitions come into play. A helpful analogy. A ship can carry a boat, but a boat can't carry a ship.
I like that. It makes the distinction clear. So a massive cruise ship is definitely a ship, but a small sailboat is a boat. What about submarines, though? They're huge, but I often hear them called boats.
That's a bit of a maritime quirk, I guess you could say. Submarines, despite their size, are often referred to as boats. It's one of those things where language and technical definitions don't always perfectly align.
Fair enough. Okay, so we've got boats and ships sorted out. Now back to that sail-to-steam revolution. When did that happen and what was the impact? Those old sailing ships look so graceful in paintings, but I imagine they were pretty slow.
The shift to steam power really took off in the 19th century. The steam engine was a game changer, leading to faster, more reliable ships that could travel much farther than sailing ships ever could.
So steamships were a major upgrade. What happened to those beautiful sailing ships we see in art? Did they just vanish overnight?
It was a gradual shift. While sailing ships like clipper ships were known for their speed and beauty, steamships just offered more in terms of cargo capacity, sticking to schedules, and weathering even the roughest seas. So the demand for efficiency and reliability really drove the move to steam power.
It's kind of sad to think of those majestic sailing ships fading from view. But I guess progress marches on. So how did we get from those early steamships to the behemoths we see today? Those gigantic container ships and cruise liners are just mind-boggling.
It's been a steady evolution of technology and design. In the 20th century, diesel engines became the dominant form of propulsion, and advancements in materials and engineering allowed for larger, faster, and more specialized ships. Plus, the development of containerization in the mid-20th century totally revolutionized cargo transport.
Containerization. That rings a bell, but I'm not totally clear on what it is.
Picture standardized metal boxes, each one able to hold tons of cargo. These containers can be easily moved between ships, trucks, and trains, making the whole process streamlined. It's made global trade so much faster and more efficient.
So those massive container ships are like Giant floating warehouses moving thousands of those containers across the oceans.
Exactly. And on the passenger side, the shift from ocean liners to cruise ships is another interesting development. Ocean liners were once the main way to travel long distances, but air travel changed that. Cruise ships, however, have tapped into that desire for leisure and adventure, becoming like floating resorts for vacationers.
It's amazing how the passenger ship industry has adapted to changing times. But it's not all smooth sailing for the shipping industry, is it? I read a lot about the environmental impact of ships. What are some of the key concerns?
You're right, there are some serious environmental challenges. One of the biggest is the risk of oil spills. Those images of oil-soaked birds and marine life are hard to forget. Oil spills are devastating to marine ecosystems and coastal communities.
It's a truly horrifying thought. What about invasive species hitching a ride on ships? I remember reading about a comb jelly that was accidentally introduced to the Black Sea through ballast water, and it wreaked havoc on the fishing industry there.
That's another major issue. Ships take on ballast water in one port and discharge it in another, and that water can carry all sorts of organisms, including invasive species. When these species are introduced to new environments, it can disrupt ecosystems and cause serious problems.
It's scary to think that something seemingly simple, like ballast water, can have such far-reaching consequences.
It really highlights how interconnected our oceans are, and the need to be careful about preventing the spread of invasive species. And then there's air pollution from ships, another major concern we need to address.
Right, ships burn a lot of fossil fuels, and I know those emissions contribute to all sorts of environmental issues, from acid rain to respiratory problems.
Exactly. They release pollutants like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter, all of which have negative impacts on air quality and contribute to climate change. It's a growing concern, especially with more and more ships on the seas.
So it seems like we've got this incredible technology in shipbuilding, but also these looming environmental challenges. It's a real balancing act, reaping the benefits of shipping while minimizing its negative impacts.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue that requires careful consideration. We need to find ways to make shipping more sustainable, both for the health of our planet and the future of the industry. And that's a challenge that calls for collaboration, innovation, and a deep understanding of those delicate ecosystems we've been talking about.
It's a lot to think about. But before we get too bogged down, I want to explore another side of ships that I find really fascinating: their symbolism. I mean, ships have always represented exploration, adventure, and this human desire to connect across continents and cultures as such powerful imagery.
I agree. Ships really do embody that spirit of exploration, the courage to venture into the unknown, the hope of discovering new horizons. And they've played such a central role in shaping our world, connecting people, ideas, and goods across vast distances.
Even in today's world, with airplanes and the internet connecting us instantly, there's still something so romantic and alluring about the idea of a sea voyage. I mean, there's a reason cruises are so popular.
There's a certain timelessness to ships and seafaring. The rhythm of the waves, the vastness of the ocean, the feeling of being at the mercy of the elements. It's an experience that connects us to something primal, I think.
It's like ships tap into a deeper part of ourselves, a longing for adventure and discovery, something beyond the everyday. And they've played such a crucial role in history, shaping trade routes, influencing wars, even transporting people to new lives in faraway lands. It's incredible to think about their impact on human civilization.
Absolutely. They're vessels of dreams, symbols of human ingenuity, and a constant reminder of our connection to the sea. Their history is interwoven with our own, and their future will continue to shape the world we live in.
This has been an amazing journey so far. We've covered so much, from ancient shipbuilding techniques to modern environmental concerns, and we even touched on the poetic side of ships. I'm excited to keep exploring this topic.
I'm happy to keep guiding you through this deep dive. There's still so much to discover about the world of ships, from the complexities of how they're built to the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
So we've talked about the different kinds of ships and even touched on their history, but I'm really curious about the nitty-gritty. How are these things actually built? Creating something that can withstand storms and travel across oceans seems like a monumental task.
It absolutely is. Building a ship is a massively complex process.
I bet. It's not like building a house. What are the main stages involved?
Well, it all starts with the design phase. Naval architects create these incredibly detailed plans for the ship. They consider its purpose, size, the conditions it will encounter at sea.
Yeah.
It's quite involved.
I can only imagine. So much to think about. What comes after the design is finalized?
Then the actual construction begins.
Yeah.
For those massive cargo ships, they often build huge sections of the hull separately, then join them together in a dry dock. It's like a giant 3D puzzle.
Wow, that's incredible. And what about the materials used? Is it all steel, like I imagine?
Steel is still the most common material because of its strength and affordability, but there's growing interest in using lighter materials like aluminum, especially for ships where speed or fuel efficiency is key.
That makes sense. So the hull is assembled. What's next? Do they just drop in the engines and set sail?
Not quite. That's when they start outfitting the ship. Engines, propulsion systems, navigation equipment, living quarters for the crew. It's like building a floating city.
It must be amazing to see a ship come together like that. And then, of course, there's the launch. I've seen videos of those huge ships sliding down into the water. Is that the standard procedure?
That's the classic image, but it's not the only way. Sometimes they float the ship out of a dry dock, or even use giant cranes to lower it into the water. Depends on the ship's size and the shipyard's setup.
It sounds like there's a lot of variation. So after the launch, it's finally time to set sail, right?
Not so fast. There's still a crucial step. Sea trials. They need to test all the systems, make sure everything works perfectly, and meets all the safety standards. It's like a test drive for a ship.
Of course, that makes sense. So after all that, the ship is finally ready for its life at sea. But eventually, even the mightiest ship reaches the end of its line. What happens then? Straight to the scrapyard.
Sometimes. But some lucky ships get a second life. They might become museums, preserving a piece of history. Or they might be intentionally sunk to create artificial reefs, providing a new home for marine life.
That's a nice way to give those old ships a new purpose. But I imagine most of them do end up being dismantled. What does that process even look like?
It's called shipbreaking, and it involves taking the entire ship apart, recycling the materials as much as possible. Steel, other metals, even parts can be reused.
I can imagine that's a pretty big job. And potentially dangerous too, right?
Yeah, shipbreaking can be hazardous work, especially if it's not done properly. There's the risk of pollution from hazardous materials on board old ships, things like asbestos or chemicals.
That's definitely a concern.
Luckily, organizations like the International Maritime Organization are working on creating better guidelines for safer and more sustainable shipbreaking practices.
Good to know. So we've covered construction and disposal, but what about the day-to-day of keeping these massive vessels running? Maintaining a ship must be a constant job.
Oh, absolutely. It's like owning a house that requires constant upkeep, but magnified 1,000-fold. Inspections, cleaning, painting, repairs, you name it. It all goes into preventing corrosion, mechanical failures, and keeping the ship seaworthy.
I bet there are whole teams dedicated just to ship maintenance. And speaking of size, we've got to talk about the sheer scale of modern ships, especially those container ships. They're mind-boggling.
They really are. Some can carry over 20,000 of those standard shipping containers, each packed with tons of cargo. It's a logistical marvel.
It's hard to even picture that many containers in one place.
Those ships are like the arteries of global trade, moving everything around the world, from the clothes we wear to the electronics we use.
It's incredible how reliant we are on them for our modern way of life.
Exactly. Ships are the unsung heroes of our interconnected world. And that brings us to an important question. What does the future hold for these vessels, especially with all the environmental challenges we face?
So it sounds like the future of ships is going to be pretty high-tech. But what about the human element? Are we going to see ships sailing themselves one day, like those self-driving cars everyone's talking about?
It's definitely a possibility. There's already a lot of talk about autonomous ships, vessels that can operate without a human crew. It could bring benefits in terms of efficiency and even safety, but it raises some questions too.
Yeah, like what about the jobs of all those sailors?
Right. And there's something to be said for the tradition and skill of seafaring. It's a way of life that's been around for centuries.
It's hard to imagine a world where ships just sail themselves, with no one at the helm. It feels like something out of a science fiction movie.
It's definitely a big change to wrap our heads around. If it does happen, it will probably be a gradual transition. And it's important to consider all the implications, both for the people working in the industry and for the safety and security of maritime operations.
Well, I think we've covered just about every aspect of the world of ships today, from their ancient origins to the cutting-edge technology shaping their future. It's been an incredible journey, and I've learned so much.
It's been a pleasure sharing my knowledge with you. I hope you've gained a new appreciation for these vessels that play such a vital role in our world.
I definitely have. A huge thank you to our expert for navigating us through this incredible deep dive. Your insights have been invaluable. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this exploration of the world of ships. We hope you've enjoyed the journey. The next time you see a ship, whether it's a towering cargo vessel or a sleek sailboat on the horizon, take a moment to think about all the history, technology, and human stories that are woven into its very fabric. Until next time, fair winds and following seas.